Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom Factor. Today we've got a lot to talk about. So let's dive right in. What are we talking about? Well, a lot of big news happened last week. Friday there was a meeting between. It was it Friday or Thursday? Last week there was a meeting between Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine in the Oval Office, and boy howdy, did that just go absolutely crazy. So let's dive right in and talk about it. So I kind of want to structure this. First off, it was a contentious meeting, and if anybody has been paying attention to the news, it did not end well. It ended with basically, essentially, Trump kicking Zelensky out of the White House, and it really did not end on a good foot. So we're gonna break it down. I've got some clips here from the interview that we're gonna break down a little bit. I'm not gonna play the whole thing. I will link it. The actual it's like a 50-minute, 49:57 in length video. C-SPAN. The one I'm going off of is the C-SPAN one. It's a static position camera. They have some. It has some perspectives. It's pretty much, for the most part, a straight-on shot of Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, kind of sitting in the chairs in front of the fireplace there. So we'll get right into it, and so the clips I've got here kind of are some highlights, I guess, from the thing. So here we'll queue up the first one, and we'll get it going from there.
And I really count on your strong position to stop Putin. And you said that enough with the war. I think that is very important, Ben, to say these words to Putin at the very beginning of war, because he's a killer and terrorist. But I hope that together we can stop him. But for us, it's very important to, to save our country, our values, our freedom and democracy, and of course, no compromises with the killer about our territories, but it will be later. And of course, what I wanted, we spoke about it by phone with you about the drones production. We have very good drones production. I think the best one in the world for today because of the war.
So there Zelensky pretty much like flat out says, like, Putin's a killer. He's a terrorist. And later on, I'll get into some of the history of all this, but really, he's obviously very contentious. If you don't know what's going on, Russia invaded Ukraine on February 22nd, 2022. This was kind of it was built up. It wasn't like this was some out of the blue kind of thing. So yeah, and let's let's I'm gonna keep moving along with these clips. This one's a pretty good one. This is Trump calling for the end of the war.
We've accomplished tremendous amounts. Not only this would be a very great achievement if we could get the war stopped and get them back to normalization. I think that's going to happen. We've had very good talks on both sides, as you know. But
yeah, so here Trump is basically, he does this. Here's the next clip.
He just said that there'll be no compromises with Vladimir Putin. I just wanted to ask both of you. Firstly, are there compromises that you think that President Zelensky is going to have to make? And President Zelensky, is there anything that you might be thinking that you may be able to offer or bring to the table, for example, elections? Thank you.
I think you're going to have to always make compromises. You can't do any deals without compromises. So certainly he's going to have to make some compromises, but hopefully they won't be as big as some people think you're going to have to make. That's all. That's all we can do. I'm here as an arbitrator, as a mediator to a certain extent between two parties that have been very hostile. To put it mildly, they've been very hostile. There's been a vicious war.
So Trump basically kind of puts it out. Like he throws it out on the thing, and I really applaud him for this. He is trying to take a very neutral stance on this, and honestly, I commend him for that because it is kind of what's going on. There was a couple of things. There's two clips I'm going to play later. This is not going to be in order, but there's a couple of clips that I want to kind of get to later that is kind of related. But here, let's do this one.
Mr. President, thank you. You had Mr. Macron and Keir Starmer at the White House this past week, both of whom praised your courage and conviction to lead the pathway towards peace.
Yes.
Part of that involved, though, re-engaging Russia in diplomatic relations, something that previous leaders lacked the conviction to do so. What gave you the moral courage and conviction to step forward and lead that?
Well, I love this guy. Who are you with?
One American News, sir.
Well, that's why I like him. One American News does a great job. I like the question. I think it's a very good question. It's a pathway to peace. It's a pathway to getting something solved. And I feel that as the head of this country, I have an obligation to do that. Plus, we're very much involved. We got involved. It's too bad we got involved because there should have been no involvement because there should have been no war.
I love this. Trump basically says, like, he wants peace, and commendable for OAN, their White House correspondent, asking that question. It's a good thing. I'm very pleased with the fact that Trump wants to end the war. Trump is he's one of the first pro-peace presidents we've had in a while, and it's a good thing to have. Is he perfect? No. So yeah, he does that. But this is what he's up against here. Check out this clip.
About security guarantees and about just ceasefire. We can't just speak about ceasefire and speak and speak. It will not work. Just ceasefire will not never work because I'm like a president. I have this experience, and not only me. Ukraine before my presidency, from the 2014, Putin broken 25 times. 25 times he broken his own signature. 25 times he broken ceasefire.
But he never broke to me. He never broke to me.
No, you were the president.
He never broke to me.
In 2016, you've been the president, Mr. President. You've been the president, but he had, of course, not with you, but he had during those periods, he had conversations with our side. And we had Normandy format, the France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia. And he broken 25 times. That's why we will never accept just ceasefire. It will not work without security guarantees.
So Zelensky here is saying that, like, he's not going to accept a ceasefire without security guarantees, and like later, why the whole thing kind of fell apart is because of, personally, I think his attitude. He comes in basically trying to think that he can boss around this administration like he did with the previous one, because as we all know, the billions of dollars in aid has gone to Ukraine, and it was an almost never-ending, unsubsiding flow of aid to Ukraine to perpetuate this war. And Trump is kind of taking the position, this is why I voted for him, was end the war, seriously. And the fact that people want to continue this war, and we'll get into it in a little bit here. But here, another clip.
Or on the Ukraine.
No, I'm in the middle. I want to solve this thing. I'm for both. I want to get it solved, and it's wonderful to speak badly about somebody else, but I want to get it solved. If we can solve it, great. If we can't solve it, they're going to have to fight it out, and who knows what's going to happen. But I want to see it get solved.
May I follow up?
So Trump wants to see it solved. He does this whole thing, and here is another clip of Trump pretty much saying just that.
With my friends in Poland, and they are worried that you align yourself too much with Putin. What's your message for them?
Well, if I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes.
So there's classic Trump. I get like the end there. So the question, if you didn't hear, there was a Polish reporter asking, people see you as being aligned with Putin. And it's such a, oh my God, it's so tiring to hear this. People constantly harping on this whole, and I guess we can get into it now a little bit, that I'm seeing a lot of it, especially on social media, people saying if you're not in full support, unequivocal, unabashed, unapologetic support of Ukraine, clearly you're pro-Russia. And it's like you're creating a false dichotomy here. This is a fallacious argument, and it really flies in the face of everything that logic would dictate on this. That no, I'm for peace. I'm with Trump on this one. I want peace. I want this war to end. I don't want this to escalate. I don't want this to turn into World War III. I do not want Russia, who, by the way, is a nuclear power, and what's his face, Putin, has said nuclear exchange is not off the table. He's said that before. He's like, I'm not going to completely say we're not ever going to use nukes, because he said that that's a possibility. And so here it's not enough to say, yes, we understand Putin is the aggressor. Putin invaded. Yes, we get that. Russia invaded. And I'll get into some of the history behind it and why you can't just solely fixate on Putin's, invasion and that's justification. But here is a good clip. VP Vance, man, JD is he does a good job. Check this out.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
So that's right before everything kind of falls off the rails, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to kind of commend our vice president for saying that, because that is key. So Trump is calling for peace. Trump is saying, let's all kind of get down. First, let's get to a ceasefire, and then let's kind of get into negotiating a peace. And people are immediately jumping at the thing. He's just going to capitulate to Russia. He's going to compromise and give Putin what he wants. Nobody's saying that. And to make that's basically making a false inference that is not coming from anything. So, that's kind of one of the big issues with this whole thing, is that basically we're calling for, one side is calling for peace while the other side is saying, no, let's continue this war. Let's beat Russia. It hasn't worked for 3 years. This war's been going on for 3 years, and it hasn't worked. So what maybe Vance is onto something here. Maybe we should try the diplomacy method. So here, let's get into right after he says that this is what transpired.
So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was,
he
I
killed.
was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly
but-
right.
Yes, but
So here he Trump kind of has to caveat this, like, so a lot of people say the history of this began in 2014. I'll get into that. It goes further back than that, but he's basically, this is in reference to the Maidan Revolution, or what those of us in other circles would say was a coup. But I digress. We'll get into that in a moment. But here he's basically trying to say, like, this all, stems back to Crimea and all this and that. And Trump's like, rightfully so. Trump's like, I wasn't there for that. So keep that in mind.
during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people are been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him. Me, like a new president in 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel. We signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes.
So here he's referencing, for those that aren't understanding, Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, France and Germany, they signed this whole like ceasefire. What really was transpiring, it was not a ceasefire like pertaining to just Russia. It was the Donbas. And I'll get into it in a little bit with the history, but like this, a lot of people don't understand. Russia was doing a whole lot of nothing after the whole Crimea annexation, which is another can of worms. But then after that, essentially, after Maidan, in the years following Maidan, the Donbas region wanted to basically secede from Ukraine and become part of Russia because they're ethnically Russian, they speak Russian, and they don't consider themselves ethnically or linguistically Ukrainian. They wanted to be part of Russia, so they started to push out Ukrainian government entities from their region, and therefore Ukraine basically called it a counterterrorism operation, because at the time they were applying for aid from the international banks, the International Monetary Fund. That Ukraine was saying, hey, we need money. We want to apply for aid from the IMF so that we can, build up our country and be more secure and all that, because we just had a change of government and all this stuff. And the IMF has strict rules that a country at war cannot apply for aid. And so they said, well, no, we're not at war. We're conducting counterterrorism operations, basically shelling their own people. At the time, I mean, that is still Ukrainian territory, the Donbas region. And so the problem here is he's saying that they signed this ceasefire. Yeah, they basically said they're going to stop shelling Donbas, which was being backed by Russia at the time, because, obviously Russia sees, okay, well, these Russians, it's kind of almost as if for instance, to kind of put it in context, if for instance you had like New Mexico and they said, we want to be part of Mexico, and they expel all of the federal offices, they attack federal installations in New Mexico, and the United States government says, oh, hell no, and starts conducting, they would see that as an insurrection. That would be an insurrection. There'd be sedition. And so they would use force against them. That's basically what was happening in Ukraine. And I'm not saying either side is correct on this. I mean, Donbas clearly wanted to be their own territory of Russia. And it can be argued Crimea the same. When Russia put troops on the ground in Crimea, that a lot of people don't realize, Crimea voted for that. There was an election. There was a vote to say we want to secede from Ukraine and become a territory of Russia, and then that precipitated Russian forces moving in. So that's what he's talking about here. We'll continue.
But after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
So here, this is what's been kind of classified as he came in and made the threat. He's like, you have these nice oceans, you feel safe now, but you won't in the future. If anybody, I couldn't find the clip in time, but there was a clip of Zelensky saying that America's going to have to send their sons to fight in this war. And I mean, I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. Being a combat veteran myself, having been to war, no, America should not be fighting Ukraine's wars. And I feel uniquely qualified because of my veteran status that you really can't appreciate being anti-war until you've been to war. From that unique perspective, yes, I understand a lot of people can be anti-war without having been to war, but it adds a new layer of a unique perspective if you've been to war and having had that experience in your life that shaped you to become more anti-war, which what has happened with me, what it has done to me. I mean, going to war it was awful. Deploying to Afghanistan was not fun. I did not enjoy it. It almost ended my life. On multiple occasions, and I'm in that position where that has shaped me to be anti-war, where that has basically precipitated my views of being anti-war. So I align with people like Scott Horton, like Dave Smith, who are very vocal about being anti-war. Like, war is awful. We should end wars. We should be working to end these wars, not perpetuate them. The fact that you have so many people opposing Trump in this, Trump wants to end the war. And I know people are like, well, no, he doesn't. Yes, he does. He has said it. He wants to end the war. He wants to negotiate a peace between both parties. Preferably, and he's stated this before, preferably a mutually beneficial peace between the two parties. But ending the war is what he's trying to push for, and people are like, well, he just wants to give Putin what he wants. There's no evidence of that, like none whatsoever, and yet people are kind of trying to claim that. So Zelensky here is basically just reiterating his old talking point about, you're going to be involved in this war whether you like it or not, and Trump's like, no. So here's where it continues to get really contentious and falling off the rails.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and
of
he
the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I
You
was
don't have the
saying-
cards right now. With us, you start having
Not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
Yes.
So here's an example. I don't think there's kind of that, language barrier. Zelensky doesn't understand the metaphor here that, he has no cards to play. That's basically what Trump's saying. He has no cards to play, and with Trump's help, he can have cards to come to the table to kind of negotiate with Putin. But Zelensky doesn't understand that reference.
You're gambling with World War III.
what you're
You're
speaking
gambling
about.
with
What you're
World
speaking
War
about.
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm
That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States
what
of
you're
America
speaking about.
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not
Yeah.
speaking loudly. Your country is
Can I-
in big
can-
trouble.
can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn
We-
good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank-
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West
if you
So here, this just kind of angers me, and this is why I'm kind of cheering for Trump for kind of ending this meeting on a bad foot. He's like saying we stood alone from the very beginning, and that's complete bullshit. We've been propping up the Ukrainian military since day one under the under the Biden administration. We've been giving them military and financial aid. Europe has been giving them financial and military aid. We've been giving them weapons so that they weren't rolled over inside of, and he'll say it here in a minute, but like, you haven't stood alone. You have nothing. You are nothing without the West helping you.
didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course,
It's
yes.
going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I
Again,
tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of
accept
times
that there,
thank you
accept
to
that-
American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running low
I know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't, please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're
I
saying
said-
you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
That
what
wasn't
this
with me.
means. It
That was
wasn't
with
with you.
a guy named Biden who was not a smart person.
This
That
is
was
your,
with,
this
that was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President.
So that's pretty much where it, like, all fell off the rails, and then later Trump ends it, and I think this kind of goes to show, like, okay, so yes, Trump, there's another instance of Trump being Trump. I don't agree with his, oh, Obama gave you sheets and I gave you javelins. Like, that's Trump being Trump. And yeah, I don't agree with that. But the other point about this is that people, need to realize is that Trump basically he's on the right track. He's saying, look, without us, you don't stand a chance. So we have to kind of back up. I believe it was, and I'm going off of memory here. I'm not an expert on this. I don't claim to be an expert. I've been reading. If you haven't had a chance, check it out. Scott Horton does a lot of really good stuff. He founded the Libertarian Institute. He's very, very good on foreign policy. He's an expert. I'm not. But I read into a lot of Scott's stuff, and between Scott Horton and Dave Smith and other people talking about this from a position of knowing, even RFK Jr. read up on some of this. But we'll dive into the history, because I think it's important to understand the history behind the Ukraine conflict, going back to essentially 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine had this kind of option of being, they were kind of on the cusp, and they wanted to be an independent nation, and so they signed this peace treaty that said Ukraine would give up their nuclear weapons, which would be taken into the custody of Russia, and once Russia reorganized as a new country, Ukraine would give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for a promise of they would be allowed to operate independent and sovereign. Now, we're gonna hold off on going forward from what happened after that, in terms of today's context. But at that point, they said, yeah, we'll give up our nuclear weapons. We won't have any nuclear weapons, and we'll do this peaceful, become an independent nation and all that. And then I don't remember who it was in 1992, had a sit down with Russia and said, with regard to Europe, and, they gave Poland back, and they said, let's, the Berlin Wall was being torn down, and, anybody who was alive then, I vaguely remember, I think it was one of the first news stories I remember as a child, was the Berlin Wall coming down, and Tom Brokaw talking about how the Berlin Wall has fallen. And, so they worked on establishing a reunification of Germany. And at the time, an envoy from the Bush administration went and spoke with the Russian government and said, if you help us to reunify Germany, and this is where the famous not 1 inch east. Obviously, the whole of Germany became part of NATO, but they said we would not take 1 inch east towards Russia. NATO would not expand. They made the promise that NATO would not expand. And of course, throughout the years, especially during the Clinton administration, NATO expanded. I mean, they took a ton more countries into their fold, including Poland, which is right next door to Russia. If you have any knowledge of geography, you'd know that. And then they put in missile defense systems in Poland. There was already some in Turkey. And so NATO was expanding, despite the fact that the Soviet Union, the entire, the Warsaw Pact had ended. It had collapsed. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Everything shut down on that. There was no more need for NATO. I mean, essentially, NATO was created to be a bulwark against the Soviet Union and the expansion of communism, and have this treaty alliance where they basically said, Article 5, if one of us are attacked, everybody else will jump into the fray and defend. And that never had to happen. Thank God. We would have seen World War III, in the 70s and 80s. And so NATO basically ceased to be relevant after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and all these satellite states became independent nations. You had Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Poland became independent, the Czech Republic, you had Ukraine become independent, and so the Soviet Empire had collapsed. why were we still promoting NATO? And the only real action NATO committed to was the Balkan conflict between Bosnia and Kosovo in the 1990s, where NATO was the ones, because the UN kind of did essentially nothing. And so the UN security forces were like, hey, you guys shouldn't be ethnically cleansing these people in your countries. And so NATO stepped in and said, no, we're gonna bomb the crap out of you and enforce a no-fly zone here. It wasn't even NATO that did any. I mean, yeah, NATO countries contributed, but it was mostly the United States and the UN going in and liberating Kuwait in the early 90s as well. That was not a NATO operation. And so Kosovo and Bosnia, that was essentially a NATO operation with the UN kind of working in the background, because really, essentially, what does the UN do? And so all of this happens, and we broke this. And I know that a lot of people will argue there was never any official agreement on paper. They didn't, they didn't have some, two people, the president of Russia and Bill Clinton showing up at Camp David and signing an agreement that not 1 inch further to the east. Nobody signed it. Yeah, I understand that, but verbal agreements were made. Verbal promises were made that we will not expand NATO. And that kind of led to some point of contention between America and Russia. And the fact that the West did not, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the West did not invite Russia in to play at the big kids table. That's the other point of contention here. We still treated Russia as an adversary. There was still this antagonistic relationship between the West and Russia throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, to the point where Russia was combating with Muslim extremism in the South, and they were combating with the whole Georgia thing, where there were parts of Georgia that wanted to be part of Russia, that didn't want to be part of the state of Russia, which seems to be a running theme here throughout the history between Russia and its former republics, the former Soviet republics, where these pockets of people, wanted to be independent and free from whatever country they were a part of, and then they wanted to no longer be part of, the whole Russia expanse or what have you. And so, granted, it was the complete opposite with Chechnya. I mean, the Chechens wanted to be their own, separate from Russia, but they're republics within Georgia that wanted to be part of Russia. There's the Crimea that wanted to be part of Russia. A huge base there in Sevastopol that Russia utilized as part of the main part of their Black Sea fleet, because the Black Sea is a major point of contention. It's basically essentially the aquatic barrier between Turkey and Russia, and so they had to maintain some level of security, because obviously Turkey being part of NATO and being allied with the West. So yeah, you have all of these former Soviet republics that are still trying to figure out their national identity and trying to figure out if they want to be part of the republic that they're in or part of the Federation of Russia. And that's where this kind of stems into with the whole history behind this. And a lot of people don't understand, with Eastern Ukraine, you have essentially these, the basically the Donbas region is kind of saying, Donetsk and Luhansk want to be part of Russia. And, it's kind of like their whole thing is they are ethnically Russian. They speak Russian. They don't really culturally identify with the Ukrainian culture. that had emerged from the 1990s. And then you get probably one of the worst things that could ever happen with regard to Ukrainian-Russian relations was what occurred following. So as there, it's kind of a contentious deal with their history in terms of the post-Soviet period, because you had them get an independence. They wanted to be an independent nation, and they had to decide. And the problem is, there's their whole problem with this was in terms of what had gone on with what's going on. They wanted to be they didn't know if they wanted to be more EU aligned or Russia aligned. And so you had kind of this issue of what was going on. So you had Viktor Yushchenko, who was in office essentially during when Obama got elected. And so he had kind of this whole issue with what was going on after the whole, basically he was kind of like one of the presidents. He was the third president of Ukraine after the whole independence of Ukraine. And what happened with him was they attempted to assassinate him with poison in 2004, and he was horribly disfigured. And then in 2004, he was up against Yanukovych. There was the Orange Revolution, and basically they had to repeat the vote, and Yushchenko won. Then in 2010, the pro-Russia Viktor Yanukovych was elected, and he basically was like more aligned with Russia. He was democratically elected. They said, so in 2004 they said that he was declared the winner, and then they said there was election fraud and voter intimidation, and so they had a revolution, and the Supreme Court said, no, we're gonna do a rematch on this, and Yanukovych then lost, and then Yushchenko was put in power, and then he ran again in 2010, and this time he won, and it was deemed up against forgive me if I butcher this name, Yulia Tymoshenko. He won in 2010, and the international observer said that it was a legit election. So he didn't want to be as aligned with the EU. He was kind of more, he withdrew, basically saying he didn't want to align with the EU. They didn't want an association agreement with the EU. And this is where it led to everybody basically saying, like, well, hold on, we want to be part of the EU. And this is where the kind of, and if you want a deeper delve into this, I definitely recommend Provoked by Scott Horton. It's his book about how we kind of dealt with this. But to kind of give you the broad strokes, what exactly happened, after he basically said, we're not going to join the EU, there was a huge protest in 2014. Big protest, early 2014, where they called it the Euromaidan, or the Maidan Revolution. And they basically took to the streets and started protesting, and protesters, like, the government, like, fought back against the protesters. It wasn't like America in 2020 during the Summer of Love, where the protests kind of did whatever the hell they wanted and burned things. No, this was the Ukrainian government fought back, and they said, no, you're not protesting this. This guy was duly elected. This is where he stands. And Yanukovych basically said, we're putting an end to this protest. And that is where the United States, namely, and this was during the Obama years, and the United States basically put Joe Biden in charge of the whole Ukraine thing. What stemmed from that, we'll get into in a minute. But so you had Joe Biden and you had Barack Obama put Victoria Nuland in charge of this Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. She was basically in charge of dealing with all of this during Ukraine, during this revolution, the Maidan uprising. And this is where a lot of contention comes from with this, that at the time, the United States was backing the pro-Western forces in Ukraine fighting against Yanukovych. They were doing the revolution, essentially a coup, and it was backed by people like Victoria Nuland, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, John McCain, Nancy Pelosi, all of these people. I mean, John McCain went to Ukraine and spoke out and said, "We support you. We support you, Ukrainians," because obviously John McCain's a war hawk. He was just bloodthirsty. And they kept this like very contentious and heated antagonistic approach to dealing with Russia, because if you remember in 2012 during the election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, they asked Mitt Romney, who's the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States? And Mitt Romney said Russia, and Obama basically laughed at him. But then 2 years later, Obama backed you had Hillary Clinton and Obama, and John Kerry, and they were antagonistic towards Russia. And the United States backed the pro-Western movement that eventually would overthrow Yanukovych as president. And the other part that a lot of people don't realize is that you had Nazis in the Maidan Revolution. You had Nazis basically saying, if Yanukovych does not abdicate and get the hell out of the country, we're going to murder him. He had death threats from Nazis that were on the side of this Euromaidan. And the Nazis threatened him, and he fled to Russia. He abdicated his position and fled to Russia. And then, against the Constitution of Ukraine, they declared Yanukovych is out. Our guy, Oleksandr Turchinov, is in. They illegally ousted a sitting democratically elected president and installed an acting president who then later would be, he was basically, after he was president, Petro Poroshenko, who was the first official president of Ukraine post-Maidan, who was a pro-Western, pro-EU president who wanted to be a part of NATO. And this was kind of the furtherance of the contention between the West and Russia, is at this point they were like, Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO. And Russia did not want that. Another country on their doorstep being part of NATO. It would be like Russia having an alliance with Canada. Would America take that? Would America take a defensive alliance with Canada, in Russia? Would we accept that? Would we be like, okay, yeah, you can do that. It's, you're a free, independent country. No, America would be like, oh, hell no, this is not happening. You are not. I mean, it was no different than them putting nuclear missiles in Cuba during the 1960s when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the whole view of Ukraine joining NATO is kind of on par with Cuba's alliance with the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s. And people still view this as like this big contentious thing. And then they're like, and then of course, there was, and oh gosh, they took the clip off YouTube, but I forget who it was. He was Foreign Affairs magazine back when what's his name, the the guy from the Daily Show, not Jon Stewart, but I can't remember his name. He was on the Stephen Colbert Report. He was there with Stephen Colbert, and he was talking about how basically Ukraine is like the girlfriend of this big bad Russian, and the West wants to steal her away and make her their own, and so they got to fight and do what they can to to convince Ukraine to come be in bed with the EU and the West and leave their Russian boyfriend. And that happened with the Maidan coup. And then he goes, well, why doesn't Obama just spike the football and say, haha, we got you, it was during the Olympics too. So like, he was like, you may have won the medal count, but we won the country count, biatch. And why doesn't he spike the football? And this guy says, no, we don't want to do that because then Putin might flip the table and say game over and invade Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened in 2022. Notice he didn't do it during Trump's entire presidency because I think Putin saw that Trump's not going to, this isn't going to go over well with Trump. This is going to be really bad. So he waited and bided his time. And then when a weak, feckless president stepped in, and a pro-Ukrainian president stepped in, then, because Putin knows Joe Biden was Obama's kind of guy for Ukraine when he was VP. He was put in charge of Ukrainian diplomacy. And then, ironically, following the Maidan Revolution and, the whole changing of the guard, somehow Joe Biden's son becomes an executive for a Ukrainian oil company named Burisma. Kind of weird, little suspicious, and a lot of people don't make that make that connection that it was kind of a quid pro quo. You scratch our back, we'll scratch yours, and we'll enrich your family. This is a huge point of this whole, I guess, contention between why Ukraine is in the middle of this kind of tug of war and why a lot of things are very contentious right now, especially with the fact that, Trump said you need to investigate this. And they called that quid pro quo. They were saying that, Trump was trying to influence illegally and all this. And Trump was saying, no. I'm just saying we're going to hold off. You need to investigate why, this corruption. And it was awful. It's awful telling that throughout the early and mid 2000s, that all the media sources out there and international news sources were saying at the time in 2010, 2011, 2012 that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. I mean, they called it was labeled that Ukraine was the most corrupt nation in Europe at the time. And then all of a sudden we have to support Ukraine. Slava Ukraine. Ukraine got invaded. So then, and to kind of, I know I'm running really long. This is turning into a lot longer video, but it needs to be said because people don't understand this. Following the Maidan coup and, Ukraine and all this stuff going on, then you had the Donbas. So then you had Crimea in 2014 basically want to be annexed by Russia. They voted to secede and become part of Russia. Russia invaded. People say Russia came in and seized. It was really more that's what they wanted. And then you had the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine say, hey, we want to be part of Russia because we don't speak Ukrainian. We don't culturally identify as Ukrainian. We don't ethnically identify as Ukrainian. We want to be part of Russia. And then they were like, no, we can't have that. Like, we already lost, Ukrainian government's like, Kiev saying, no, we already lost, the whole Crimean area. We can't have that. Now we're going to have to stand up to you guys and say, no, we're not doing this. So they basically declared anti-terror operations against Donbas. There was a lot of fighting, and that's what Zelensky was talking about with the whole, ceasefire and all that, because Russia was backing the Donbas. We're not gonna. I mean, like my really bad analogy with New Mexico. Mexico would be having troops fight to back them if they wanted to secede and become part of Mexico. So that's Russia, and there's a lot of stories, and I'm not defending Russia in any way, shape, or form, because there's a lot of stories of guys who were not in uniform, who are Russian soldiers fighting in the Donbas to help them, and that Russia was giving them military aid. And so then that goes on. They get this ceasefire, and then things kind of settle down, and everybody's kind of waiting to see what happens in 2020 with the election. I mean, obviously, you have COVID just kind of really messing the whole world up. But then everybody's waiting to see what happens with the U.S. presidential election in 2020. And then lo and behold, Joe Biden wins the election. And of course, with the help of some very seditious things going on, some very suspicious activities where, the Hunter Biden laptop story, the Russia collusion falling apart, all this stuff getting suppressed. Like the whole Hunter Biden thing was suppressed by social media and the leftist media. And there are there's a lot of data to show that a lot of people would have voted differently if they had known about the whole Hunter Biden corruption stuff. And I mean, we're talking the Biden family is incredibly corrupt, and I could do a whole video on that. But the Biden family was incredibly corrupt, and they were getting tons of money from contracts with Hunter Biden, with Ukraine and China. But I digress. That's for an entirely different conversation. But with regard to this, then Biden's in power, and then in February of 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. And ever since, the Biden administration has been flooding tons of money and aid into Ukraine to fight Russia. And on multiple occasions, any time that peace was proposed, it was shot down. Like the whole Russia-Ukraine fight has been, I mean, we're talking like, it's been just insanity how nobody seems to want peace. You had, at the time, I can't remember the British Prime Minister at one point shut down peace talks. And Zelensky's been like, no, we're not going to have peace talks because we don't trust Russia to abide by a ceasefire. Understandable, but still, it's like nobody wants. It seems like there's all these people, especially on the left, who don't want peace. They don't want a sit down. They don't want to have an agreement. They want to straight up punish Russia. They want to beat Russia and completely destroy them so that they don't pose any threat to the West ever again. And unfortunately, that is not the way things need to go. The United States is not the empire that it needs to be. We don't need to be involved. And that's my personal opinion. There is no need for there to be any involvement with the United States backing Ukraine fighting against Russia at all. I mean, that's the whole crux of it. Like, why is this our fight? Why are we the ones to donate billions of dollars to Ukraine while Europe is not even touching that amount of money? And now there's talk. There's talk now of France and the UK actually committing troops to the war. And I just view that as, like, this is where I back Trump. I really do think Trump needs to put his foot down and say, listen, we're brokering peace. We're done. It's gotten to the point where how I'm almost like flabbergasted by this. How is Trump the level head in the room? And all these other people are these bloodthirsty, war-hungry maniacs that want to continue this bloody conflict between Russia and Ukraine. When are there no adults that want to say, okay, time out, hold up, let's talk peace, let's try and end this? No, everybody's like, let's keep fighting. We stand united with Ukraine. I'm like, this is insanity. I never thought I would see this in my lifetime, where the 2025 Democrats look almost exactly like the 2003 Republicans on the eve of war in Iraq. I mean, am I on clown world here? It's insane that these people want to fight more, that they want more bloodshed, more war. To what? To own the Russians because Putin's this evil dictator? And I'm running out of time here. I didn't want this to be over an hour, but because usually you lose your audience after some time. But honestly, the whole fight there and there's this pervasive false fear that if Putin takes Ukraine, Poland is next. Like, that is the most insane. Like, they're acting like this is 1938 Germany all over again. That Putin's going to start taking things, and we can't have a policy of appeasement. We can't have a Chamberlain going on here. We need to be strong like FDR. When you don't realize FDR was okay with Hitler for a number of years before World War II kicked off. Just FYI on that one. But I'm blown away that people want to perpetuate war and nobody wants to sit down and have peace. And why it's Donald Trump, the MAGA people, and libertarians that are all kind of like, hey, we should probably try this peace thing out for a chance, instead of continuing the fight. So, I mean, I guess in conclusion, to hopefully people understand this a little bit better, why it's such a big deal, why Trump advocating for peace is far better than this perpetuating of the war. I think we should cut the purse strings off right now and say, nope, we're not giving you one more red cent of American tax dollars to continue your basically deadlocked bloody war. I mean, neither side is really making gains in either direction. It's not like U.S. Funding and weapons and equipment have been, helping Ukraine push back the Russian menace. No, it's been deadlocked. I mean, it's insane to have this war continue in perpetuity. Like, who wants this? So, that's all the time I've got today. I hope that this has been informative more than anything. But also I hope that, basically you kind of understand what's going on with this. Look, I'm not endorsing... my position on this is to hell with both of these. I hate Putin. I hate Zelensky. They both suck. Zelensky's a petulant child. He comes into our house asking for money and then has the gall to threaten America and say, you're going to feel it. And no, I have no love for Putin either. I don't want to see Putin gain any territory. I mean, if anything, it'd be great if they could figure out some sort of peaceful resolution to the Donbas region. If that involves Donbas joining Russia, where is the harm in that? I know Putin has said he wants to, reunify Ukraine, but if there's a promise that, we let the Donbas region secede and join Russia, and in exchange, that's the red line. You do not stop, otherwise NATO gets involved. And I would definitely say, and this has kind of come up, and this is kind of a hot button, but he called it out on the whole NATO thing, like where Trump said, calls out NATO and says, they're not paying their fair share and we're done. Oh, and I forgot this. This is another clip I really want to play for you guys. So, real quick.
It's actually a very important question.
We spoke about this in detail with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and others at lunch yesterday. And I know that Secretary of Commerce Lutnick followed up in private meetings last night. This is really important. We believe Americans have the right to speak their mind, even if we in this room disagree with them. They have the right to speak their mind in the public square, which is often online these days. And we're going to defend that right as it pertains to American companies and American citizens vigorously if we have to. I do think that under the President's leadership, we're going to find common ground with our friends in the UK on this question, but it remains to be seen. The principle that will guide us is we believe in free speech in this country and we'll fight for it for American citizens.
That right there, I think, is a great point to close on. So hopefully this has a peaceful resolution. Hopefully this war doesn't continue in perpetuity because war is bad. I can't believe I'm 2025. A controversial opinion is war is bad. Who would have thought that? That just completely blows my mind. But I want to thank you all. If you've made it this long, I want to thank you. Like, subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I welcome any friendly debate in the comments. I will not tolerate any type of, your Russian asset, Russian bot, Russian propaganda, blah, blah, blah. No, I get my facts from reputable, unbiased sources that actually view the facts, not with a slant of pro-NATO, pro-Russia, none of that. But really, if you want to learn more about this, I definitely recommend checking out Scott Horton, antiwar.com, Part of the Problem podcast with Dave Smith. They cover it in better context than I ever could in better wording. But I know Dave Smith has discussed the whole Ukraine thing on Joe Rogan a couple of times. And he words it way better than I do. But really, it is. This is paramount. This is. We're trying to stop World War III. So hopefully you're more informed. Hopefully you're better enlightened on the Ukrainian situation. And I wish Trump the best. God bless him and his administration in their attempts to broker peace. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one.